About 100 years ago in New England, where I live now, there was a woman who was complaining about the news media. Here's what she wrote, and I'd love for you to listen to these words to see if they resonate. She said, "Looking over the newspapers of the day, one naturally reflects that it's dangerous to live, so loaded with disease seems the very air." A century later, we're still in about the same place. Look at the news, and one naturally reflects that it's dangerous to live. Now, I want to talk about this woman and what else she was thinking about when she wrote those words, but first I want to talk about that sense of danger, that fear, and not just fear, but the story of fear. And I want to talk about how it is well past time for me and my colleagues to move beyond that story and into a new narrative, because the fear narrative that we've spread has been incredibly damaging. Now, I'm a journalist by profession, and I love my job. I have loved the newsroom, I love my editors, I love delving into worlds totally unlike my own, from South Africa to South Boston. I like writing people's stories, but I've started to realize that a lot of what my colleagues and I have done with our careers is to make you afraid. Sometimes we make you angry too, we like doing that, but mostly we've made you scared, and that is a big problem. It's a problem for us in our industry, for sure. As some of you may know, it's been a rough decade or so for the news business. There have been a number of newspapers that have shrunk or folded. Scores of journalists have been laid off. And throughout all of this, there's been a lot of economic hand-wringing. The business experts came in, and they basically said, the problem with you news people is that you're behind the times. You need to innovate, embrace new media, make money off the web, get younger readers, do quizzes, and definitely tweet. At no point did people stand back and say, maybe part of the problem here is that we've gotten the story wrong. Maybe we're stuck in the wrong narrative. And this, I would say, is a much bigger issue for us. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she told me that she had watched the national news the night before, and there were three main stories. The first was a national trend story of horrible auto fatalities, sort of a great piece of car accidents from around the country. The second was on peanut allergies, how everything you knew was wrong and how your child might be at risk, even if you don't know it yet. The third, I believe, was on ISIS. More fear, more beheadings, fearful coverage of a group that someone ironically has gotten a lot of publicity for playing the media fear game so effectively. Now, this is network news, right? But your newspapers are not much better. And here's the problem for us journalists. This does not reflect the world. And our readers know this. You know this. You go about your day, and most of your interactions are just fine. You smile at people, and they smile back. People are trying to do what's right for their families. People have great ideas, and often incredible perseverance. And that's not just true here. In some of the most poor and troubled countries in the world, and I've reported in them, there is an awful lot of joy. And we don't see this in our news. And when people realize that our news is not reflective, when they realize it's not objective, they stop trusting us. They shut us out. And I did just use the word objective, that holy grail word of journalism. Whether you believe it or not, us journalists do really care deeply about and strive for objectivity. But the very term has become distorted. Today, screaming at each other across a table, the he said, she said political circus, the constant terrifying news from around the world, all of that is labeled objective. And it's not. It's totally biased. It's biased towards bad news, it's biased toward anger, and it's biased towards fear. Indeed, you could say that we are in an age of rubbernecking journalism with bad car accidents all over the place. We have a term in our business. It's called the major click headline. And these are headlines that we write essentially to be so shocking that you can't help but click on our website. You can't help but click on those headlines. And to go back to those business experts, a lot of newsroom budgets these days are tied to the number of times that you click on our websites. Advertisers pay about $5 per 1,000 page views. And so there's a lot of pressure to write these major click headlines, and readers do click. They rubberneck. But they don't love us for that. They want to drive on. And I found this out for myself soon after I came back from Southern Africa, where I was based as a foreign correspondent. And I love this part of the world. It was rich and vibrant and filled, as all places are, with fascinating culture and nuance. And I wrote about the bad stuff. I wrote about AIDS, I wrote about war, but I spent a lot more time focused on the life. I really felt that my job there was to show people here that people there, really far away, actually existed. And exist in the same way that we exist, with our own social struggles, our own hopes and fears and innovations. And it was inspiring, and I was sure when I came home that I would continue to be involved in some way from the news from that part of the world. And then, really quickly, I realized that I didn't want to read about it. The Africa of the news, and I do realize here that we're talking about an entire continent, and that's part of the point, but the Africa of the news was not the place that I had known. The Africa of the news was simply scary. And the more I read about it, the more I felt even myself getting afraid of it, to the point where even today I have to struggle to not associate the entire continent of Africa with Boko Haram and Ebola, because that's what you read about. This got even worse after I had children. After I had kids, I didn't want to read the news at all, domestic or international. And this is a really tricky position to be in when you're a professional journalist. But it was terrible. The more I read, the more I wanted to protect these children from the world. The more the world, whether it was other countries, other parts of my city, other families, started to seem like a danger. The more I read, the more shut off I became. But here, why should this matter to you? Maybe you've already figured this out. Maybe you've stopped reading the news. Why does it matter to you that we are shooting ourselves in the foot with our fear narrative? Well, the first reason is that the fear is there whether you have tried to opt out or not. It's like that woman in New England said, it's as if it's in the air. Look, for instance, at how we raise children today in this country. We know that a generation ago, children roamed. They walked miles. They went across streams, into forests, across streets, all by themselves. We actually have research that follows the geographical patterns of children's movements, and we know that today in those same communities, children barely leave the confines of their own homes without supervision. Why? The country has never been safer. The chance of a child being abducted or harmed by a stranger is absolutely minuscule. And yet our behavior has changed tremendously, to the point that parents have faced legal action for letting their children go to the playground alone or walk home by themselves. The fear is in the air. And indeed, it is in the air, right? It's on every mobile device that you own, every social media site you visit, everywhere you go. You know, I was at the airport the other day with my kids, and they're 2 and 4 years old, and they don't get to watch television at home. And so when they go to the airport, they get excited because I think they saw Scooby-Doo there once. And so they run over to the television screen, and there at gate B14, playing for everybody, walking around, are these terrifying images of these men in black face masks, holding guns, shooting them into the air, yelling, and my little girls are looking at this. And I, of course, rush over and I say, oh my goodness, don't watch that, don't watch that. And they say, why, Mommy, why not? And I hear myself say, well, it's the news. Children shouldn't watch the news. News is bad for children. This is not good for our business. The fear is in the air, and it impacts everything. It impacts our foreign policy. It impacts the empathy or lack thereof that we have for the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. And this brings me to the second reason why you should care whether we can move beyond our fear narrative. By spreading fear, by forcing people to dig in, mistrust their neighbors, fear the world, we are failing in our main purpose for being. Journalism should build community. That's our job. Even those crucially important functions of revealing injustice, showing corruption, these should be done with the goal of creating a more just and more connected society. I'm not talking about being a Pollyanna here. There have been attempts to make good news media outlets, and much of the time these seem fake or at least out of touch with reality. There are clearly problems in our world, and one of our roles is to expose them. But it should also be to analyze them, to explain them, and to give readers the hope, motivation, and inspiration to act. I've heard journalism called the ministry of being present. And I would take this a step further. I would say that journalism is a ministry that allows us to be present for each other. Journalism should be healing. And that takes me back to that woman in New England. Her name was Mary Baker Eddy, and she was the founder of the Christian Science Church and the Christian Science Monitor. And the Monitor, for those of you who don't know it, is an independent, non-religious publication that's international and has won a number of Pulitzer Prizes. Mary Baker Eddy started it after becoming the target of a lot of really nasty attack journalism. And rather than turn her back on the news, she decided to create a publication that would, in her words, injure no man but bless all mankind. This was a radical notion, but it worked. And it's still a radical notion, and it still can work. And I believe it's time for my industry to embrace it far more fully. Mary Baker Eddy recognized that the stories we tell have a profound impact on the perceived reality in which we live. Journalism has an awesome ability and responsibility to shape this reality. We need to come to a more complete recognition of this and a complete recalibration of the way that we perceive of, report, and then publish the news. This is not going to be easy. This is a turning around of the entire ship. This is going to take soul searching from the shareholders and publishers to the desk editors and beat reporters and out through our readers. For a long time now, we've operated with that "if it bleeds, it leads" motto in different iterations and whether we admit it or not. And we need to change it. And this is also going to require a significant shift in conventional business wisdom. I understand that for a long time there, it seemed to some people to make sense to get the lowest number of preferably least experienced and inexpensive journalists writing as many stories as possible. And I understand from an editorial perspective that given these constraints, those fear narrative pieces are the quickest, easiest, and cheapest to get. But in the long term, this strategy is deadly. It's bad for us and it's bad for our country. We need to change it. We need to invest in coming up with new business solutions that prioritize content over the lowest common denominator. We need to attract and invest in smart reporters and give them the time and resources to do those pieces that matter. This is not going to be easy, but you can help us. You have more power now than ever before to shape the news. As I mentioned before, we care a lot about what's happening on our websites. So the next time you see one of those major click headlines, ask yourself whether it's really news. And if it's not, don't click. That will actually matter. Similarly, if you do see a story that inspires you, that connects you to some part of your community or the world, that interests you, that builds our togetherness, pass that story along. Editors these days are very interested in what stories go through our social media networks. Use that power. Use that power to help us move beyond the fear narrative. There is so much information out there. We realize that. We're all inundated with it every day, every minute. And so much of it is fearful. But as Mary Baker Eddy said, predicting danger does not dignify life, whereas forecasting joy and liberty does. Help us move past the fear narrative. help us find and then forecast the joy. Thank you very much. About 100 years ago in New England, where I live now, there was a woman who was complaining about the news media. Here's what she wrote, and I'd love for you to listen to these words to see if they resonate. She said, "Looking over the newspapers of the day, one naturally reflects that it's dangerous to live, so loaded with disease seems the very air." A century later, we're still in about the same place. Look at the news and one naturally reflects that it's dangerous to live.